Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how Boris Johnson's latest COVID inaction is the inevitable consequence of ever allowing Brexit to poison our politics, and what the consequences of this latest insanity will be. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So we've got a surge in COVID again. That we cannot even reliably measure because we reached our testing capacity some days ago, at a time when infections were believed to be doubling every 3 days. I mean, we can never be certain about the actual number of infections for a few reasons. First and most obvious one is that people, if they don't display symptoms, they are unlikely to get a PCR test. Sometimes there are other reasons to get a PCR test, but most people are not going to. Secondly, some will not get tested even if they do have symptoms. Maybe because the media has played down COVID, told them Omicron in particular is milder when it's not, to the point where people will dismiss it as either something else or not important, because they think Omicron is mild. Third, some will not get tested because they don't want to deal with the consequences of a positive test. It might be that they cannot afford the time off work with our pathetic rate of sick pay, or because there's like a party they really want to go to. But there's a fourth problem now, in that people are struggling to get PCR appointments at testing centres. Even lateral flow tests are tricky to come by at the moment. So there's less testing of asymptomatic COVID as well. And after a weekend of no data reporting, which some may have thought, it was the Christmas weekend, of course they weren't going to do it then. But that's not the case, because other Western countries were still doing it. They have Christmas as well, but they carried on reporting. The results after a few days of absence came out last night and they looked lower. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because the rate of infection is subsiding. It's because we're still processing test results from a full week ago. If you look in the detail about where the results have come from, there's still people who've done tests a week ago that haven't got those results through yet, which means they're not on our data. The whole system is behind. So when we look at the current state of COVID infections, we need to be mindful that the real figure is far higher and out of proportion to previous times this year due to that failure of testing and reporting capacity. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland had already announced tighter measures. Already announced them. Boris Johnson made a song and dance of announcing yesterday that we would not be doing so in England. Why? Is his data different to that in the rest of the UK? No. Are the conclusions of his scientific advisors different to other advanced nations where Omicron is letting rip? No, it is not. There are two differences here. The first is that the lunatics are in charge. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there are different devolved administrations, all led by different parties or combinations of parties. All of them. There's no crossover at all. And yet they all agree, all of them, that stronger measures were necessary. And in fact, they'd have liked stronger measures still, but that would have needed Westminster's help, which is not forthcoming. Only one party in the UK thinks that these measures are not needed, and that is the Conservative Party. And I do not know exactly what would happen if we had a more traditional Conservative Party in power, but it hardly matters. We've got what we've got. And what we have is a group that were willing to push through a hard Brexit. Brexit is not a practical solution to any problem that ever existed for the UK. In fact, it was an act of madness. Not with hindsight. Some people are starting to see it was a bad decision. It was never with hindsight. It was known at the time. Any Conservative forces ranged against a hard Brexit, at least, were purged from the parliamentary party. So what we ended up with was a parliament where over half of the seats belonged to people insane enough to go ahead with Brexit. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that the same level of insanity would manifest in other areas, like public health. And the second difference at play is with the devolved administrations, the heads of government deciding England health matters is a lame duck. There may be COVID sceptics in any or all of the parties that are in power throughout the rest of the UK. I don't know what proportion there are. But none have got the power over those in the Conservative Party right now. If Boris Johnson wanted to put in tighter measures, he could get the votes to do it. There's no problem there. This is not like a majority of MPs are against these measures. Boris Johnson, if he needed to put these measures in place, could get the votes to do it. But it's not the COVID votes that he is concerned about, but confidence votes. Ordinarily, it would be silly to threaten a Prime Minister's position over public health measures, particularly when the public would be in support of them. Even the swiveliest of swivel-eyed loons can see that. But a confidence motion in Johnson's leadership can be justified for any number of reasons now. He has lost the trust of the public. He is an electoral liability. And I know people pointed out that Thatcher had a similarly low approval rating a couple of years into her time in power and turned it around, but that was the Falklands, wasn't it? What's Johnson going to do? Send troops against the next stage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I don't think so. All Johnson has is fake fishing wars, and they're pretty much over now. And because Johnson is mortally wounded, his would-be successors are sniffing out opportunities for support. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have gone early, but others are jostling as well. The COVID sceptics in the Conservative Party have seen their opportunity, and they have been reported to be making it clear to any potential successors that their support is unlikely to be forthcoming unless they oppose any public health measures that Johnson may wish to propose. And everyone can see this. Boris Johnson is not making decisions based on data or even based on political calculations for the health of his government's approval ratings. He's making them based on the sword of Damocles above his head. Keir Starmer said they're in the middle of absolute infighting in their party as he hides from public scrutiny and those around him circle to see whether they can be his successor. And that's exactly what's happening. The job of governing in an emergency is not happening. I mean, it was never happening very effectively under Johnson at all, but it's not happening at all now. Not even an interest. The papers are cheering the fact that we can have parties as if they were small children asking for a treat. Reporting on the latest data showing Omicron to be milder, when the actual data doesn't show that at all. If anything, it's worse than Delta. And the government permit them to persist with these lies. First thing, a paper says that the first thing the government should be doing is says, no, actually, you'll find that the data shows that Omicron is resulting in more serious illness, particularly for the unvaccinated. They could use that to encourage more people to get vaccinated, to point out that if you're unvaccinated, getting Omicron is worse for you than getting Delta. You are more likely to be hospitalised. That's what the data shows. But they allow the papers to propagate these lies because there's a significant section of their own party that want to propagate the same lies. But the consequences are huge. A large proportion of NHS staff are already absent at any one time with COVID. I talked recently about how the number of general and acute hospital beds in NHS England has gone down during the pandemic itself. Actually during the pandemic. And this is why. A bed is not a bed if you can't put anyone in it. And you can't put a patient in it if it can't be staffed, if they can't be cared for. You can't just stick them in there and stick them in a corner. We already had a terrible shortage of doctors and nurses, as well as other frontline NHS staff. If you take a load more away from frontline service because we're not protecting them with decent PPE or strong public health measures, and you have even fewer. And there were some people thinking, I heard that we weren't giving them the proper PPE last year, but that was all sorted, wasn't it? No, it was never sorted. It's still not sorted now. The papers just stopped going on about it. Ironically, the latest report from last month on the hospital beds said that the number of beds was starting to increase again. Well, guess what? It won't be now, will it? Because every time the percentage of doctors and nurses that's available goes down, so too do the number of beds available. These boneheads looking at the numbers in hospital and comparing it to previous points in the pandemic are comparing apples with lemons. Some hospitals are already overwhelmed. Omicron continues to rise. We're putting in no serious efforts to curb it. And all because a load of people believed the lies that foreigners were nicking their jobs. And don't even get me started on schools. We must make sure that all schools are fully open when they return. But they're not going to be, are they? These Conservatives are like King Canute. Just because they say a thing, it's going to happen. They say schools must be fully open. That doesn't mean it will be. Teachers are badly exposed to the virus as well. In fact, never mind not getting the right PPE, they're not getting any at all. Loads of teachers off. So whole classes, maybe even entire year groups will have to be sent home. Makes no difference what the Education Secretary or even the Prime Minister say about that. If you haven't got the teachers, you're not going to have the classes. And this will be happening everywhere. In every public service area, there will be absences and a loss of service. Businesses will have staff absent and they'll be struggling. Unison, which is one of the larger unions, said that years of cuts to public services had left just about enough staff to get by in normal times. But Omicron had put paid to that and services are now in a perilous state. Over the weekend, some people were posting pictures of plague stones around the country. Now, this is what we had in the 17th century when we had the Great Plague here. And they had little wells and they were full of vinegar. And people used them to wash their hands and their money. You know, during the 17th century plague, they wore masks without whining as well. People who lived over 300 years ago, before germ theory had even been published, took public health more seriously than we do. When people wonder what will finish off the human race, don't worry about comets or nuclear war or even zombies. Right-wing brainwashing is what's going to bring the end times for us. And I must finish on that point with this. Just as I was about to go off and record and I saw this, quite brilliant. A right-wing, well, he calls himself a journalist, posting a photo of what he claims is his grandfather. I've no reason to doubt that. The rest of it is absolute tosh, though. His next statement was roundly torn down. He said it was from the 1950s, again, fine, back when you could live your life without waiting for the Prime Minister to decide how free we could all live. Nicholas Pegg then pointed out that actually, in the 1950s, we still had food rationing. We did. We weren't even allowed, well, I was around at the time. People who were around at the time weren't even allowed a biscuit if you didn't have the stamps for it. Then we had petrol rationing as part of the 50s as well. So bang goes your freedom of the road. Conscription for the whole of the 50s. So there went part of your youth. Racial discrimination was lawful. So you tried telling people who weren't white. In fact, I was going to say, you tried telling people who weren't white that they were free. But in actual fact, it wasn't just white either. You could see, I've seen photos where it would not just say no blacks. It might say no Irish as well. You were a bit buggered even if you were Irish. All on full show, all perfectly legal. You'd get life imprisonment if you tried to be free about your sexuality as well. Where was the freedom, really? But despite the fact that this Telegraph journalist was lying, clear, objective lies, and the lies were pointed out, that won't stop him carrying on with those lies. Like Johnson, he lies even when the lies are exposed because some will still believe them. And that's where we are now. Some still believe the lies and we're all going to suffer the consequences. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.